Hello, and welcome to a short introduction video for how Doubly Good measures organisational maturity. We call it the Maturity Index, and what we're trying to do here is measure the maturity of the team. It's not the job of this index to measure the qualities of the team's outputs, but we do believe if you have a team that performs well on this index, good outcomes are highly likely. And certainly we've found that the inverse is also true. So if you've got a team that performs badly on this index, the outcomes are also quite likely to be poor. Okay, so how do we structure this? First of all, we divide our work into 4 phases. We've got phase 1, stop self-harm, phase 2, becoming more context aware, phase 3, better for less, and phase 4, continuously evolving. So phase 1 is stop doing all the things that are actively working against the success of your team. Phase 2 is we kind of know what we're supposed to be doing, we're practicing and aiming to get better, but it still feels forced, if you like. Phase 3, better for less, we're doing all the right things, we're beginning to optimize some of the work that we do, we're optimizing the way that we work together, all that sort of thing. And then as we move into the sort of phase 4 state, we are now in the sort of what I like to call the sort of the power moves or the flow state of the team. Everything's pretty seamless. All right, so those are our 4 work phases. Next up is the categories. And what we do is we measure those 4 phases against all 6 of these categories. So we've got communication, that's our methods of communication, the way that we communicate with each other. We've got development, so the mechanics of development or building things or making the stuff that we make or sell or do. The operation of the organization, the manner by which we learn things, how we lead, and sometimes in certain cases, how well we are led, and also how we structure ourselves. Okay, so now we've got our 4 phases and we've got our 6 categories. Let's see what it looks like on a grid. Okay, so this is what it looks like on the grid. We've got our rows here with the phases on, and we've got our columns with all the 6 categories. And then what we do next is we start with some questions. We ask everybody in the team, basically it's a statement, and we ask each team member if they agree with the statement. And we map how well we're doing on the chart in a nice color-coded way. So, for example, the first question is, or the statement is, we all speak a common language. And if the team member agrees, they click the blue button. If they don't know, it's yellow. And if they disagree with that statement, then it's red. So it's fairly simple, kind of basic multiple choice question. And you could do this on paper. You don't have to do it with, an electronic form, whatever. And then we count the results and display a modal result on the chart. So here's our top left corner of our chart. We've got our first statement, which is we all speak a common language. And in this instance, because most of the team agreed that we do in fact speak a common language, the answer is displayed as a blue one. So an unanswered grid looks a little bit like this. And what you can see here is that in some of these cells, we've got multiple questions, and in others, we've got no questions at all. And that's to do with the kind of priorities of working practice within a particular kind of phase as we're sort of measuring it. So, for instance, if we're in a phase of our team is still in a phase of self-harm, then leading and structure questions aren't going to be terribly useful at this point. What you need to be looking at are the sort of questions around communication, development, operation, and learning. And as you move through the phases, you see that there are more and more questions across here. And you also notice that, again, similarly, as you get into the sort of the continuously evolving state, that there are some areas of the questioning that are less important. So hope by the time you get to phase 4, your communication and development and operational queries are kind of already dealt with. Your team are operating pretty well at this point. Okay, so let's have a look at what an actual chart might look like. And so in this case, this is a team who are not performing terribly well and not a terribly mature team. And you can see that they disagree really about pretty much everything. But they do have one blue one, which is in phase 3. You've got Seek the Best. And you could tell that perhaps that this is quite a prestige-focused team. And it also illustrates that it's not necessarily a very linear journey. You're not automatically starting at this top left and that goes blue, and then you gradually work your way to the bottom right. Sometimes you've got pockets of effectiveness or across the board. Okay, let's have a look at a more effective team, what that result might look like. Now, this is a very effective product team. So they've really got quite a lot of blue across the board. They've got a couple of red, they've got a few red ones, they've got a few yellow ones, don't know, but for the most part, they are doing really well. And if I was in a team that had this kind of chart, and I would expect them to be operating pretty effectively, and I'd expect their outcomes to be quite good. Okay, and this is what you're striving for. But I guess then the next question is really, if you're starting from a position of being in the mostly red, what do you focus on first? Well, let's have a look at this. This is going back to our first one. So you've got a team which is almost entirely red in the first phase. And what you need to do is focus on these elements of the work of the team, the way that they work. So in this case, it's using a common language, feeling confident that you're able to challenge assumptions, that you understand what's being considered in terms of the kind of communicating with each other. Then in the development, you've got to know your users and focus on those user needs. You need to remove bias and duplication. You've got to use the right methods or the appropriate methods for whatever it is that you're making. And in terms of your operation, it's really important to know the details. And in the way that the team learns, you've got to have a bias towards data. And this is something we talk about a lot, which is kind of data-led decision making. But you really need to be able to get into the habit of using data to make decisions. And as I mentioned before, there's nothing in the leading and structure here in phase 1. You just got to focus on these red things. And then gradually, as you focus on these, you can do the whole questionnaire again, and you can begin to see where the team is beginning to feel like they're a bit more effective. And what I would say is that it won't necessarily be a linear journey. You may well start off with a sort of all red or mostly red pattern, and then over time you can see where you're working. Hopefully that you're beginning to turn blue, and your team's feeling more confident about those areas where they're turning blue. But you might also spot that some areas might revert back to red perhaps if you've got a new team member, or if there's been a change of circumstance. So you shouldn't expect it to be necessarily a sort of a perfect sort of moving from red to blue. But eventually, obviously, the aim is to be able to get to a sort of a more blue state. And what's quite nice about the chart is because the questions that we've got are quite generic. It means that they're applicable to almost any business or organizational structure. And so they're consistent over time. And that means that you can get a sense of the progress over time as well of your team. Okay. All right. That is our brief introduction. And I'll say thanks for watching. And I'll add some references to the board for you to learn a little bit more about this way of thinking about team maturity. And please do come back.